If you are watching this show or listening to this podcast, chances are you're a prepper, whether you know it or not. Some of you just embrace it. You're just like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I be a prepper? Duh. And then others are like, no, I'm definitely not a prepper. I don't prepare. What's the point of being a prepper for situations that aren't ever going to happen or are very unlikely to happen? Well, let me ask you this: if you fall into that latter category, do you have in your home? Do you have smoke alarms? Maybe a fire extinguisher or fire blankets or anything like that? If you do, guess what? You're a prepper. You're a fire prepper. You're prepared for the unlikely but possible event that your home catches on fire and you want to survive it. You don't want to be stuck asleep and waiting for the smoke to wake you up or not, waiting for the flames to wake you up or not. You're prepared for that possibility, unlikely as it may be. Being a prepper, the difference between being a regular prepper and a doomsday prepper is that a doomsday prepper takes into account more possible negative actions, more possible negative circumstances. That's it. You're already a prepper to some extent. Do you have a spare tire? Well, you're prepared for the unlikely but possible scenario where one of your tires blows out or goes flat. That's called preparedness. We'll call it automotive catastrophe preparedness. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Point is that extending that mindset to more emergencies, more situations, that's what is required to be a full-blown prepper. And this is something that's been near and dear to my heart for a very long time. I've done this podcast off and on for years, and we are very focused on putting it out there every day, maybe every other day. We'll see how it goes. I've got a ton of content to cover, so we might be doing sometimes 2 a day. We will see. This is why I have partnered with my good friends over at Heaven's Harvest. They do a fantastic job there. They're faith-driven. They have amazing, high-quality, American-made food, American-grown food they sell that has shelf life of up to 25 years, sometimes more. You can check them out by going to patriot.tv/food, patriot.tv/food. Let's get into this about why you're a prepper, whether you know it or not. We have this article posted over at discern.tv titled, "You're a Prepper, You Just Don't Know It Yet." And maybe you do know it. Look, if you're sitting there, you're already going down the road of full preparedness. You're learning, you're gathering, you're storing, you're planning, you're spreading the word. That doesn't mean that this article, this podcast, is not for you, but you can check it out and read the whole thing over at discern.tv. I'm just going to go over some of the bullet points to keep this relatively short. As I noted earlier, most Americans are already practicing basic preparedness without realizing it. Savings accounts, for example, smoke detectors, spare tires, and first aid kits are all forms of prepping, just never labeled as such. Who cares what the labels are? I always have to be very clear about that. I don't care whether you think I'm crazy or not. It doesn't affect how I protect myself, protect my family, and prepare for whatever is to come. Now, of course, this goes without saying, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Let's turn off the screen real quick there. The only required form of preparedness is the preparedness of your soul. You can have all the stockpiles of food and ammunition and meds. You could have a perfect bunker. You could be completely off the grid, locked away. Nobody even knows that you exist, let alone where you are. And you're ready for hurricanes and whatever, wormwood. You're ready for it all. But your soul is the only thing that actually has to be prepared. And you can prepare your soul by believing in your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Repenting, being baptized in the Spirit. These are the only things that are absolutely required of you. And you might be there, atheist, agnostic, some other religion, and thinking to yourself, no, I don't need any of that. And I'm not going to force feed it to you. I'm just going to tell you, yes, you do. Which is why, to me, the only true necessity for a prepper, to get started is having your own Bible, a paper version of your Bible, a book. That doesn't mean that you have to use it all the time. I know a lot of people like to use apps on their phones or websites because it's easier to read, easier to cross-reference. I get it, but you never know when that's going to disappear, and you don't want to get caught without a Bible. So make sure you've got a Bible or 2 or 10 available to you, physical Bibles at all times. So the biggest barrier to preparedness isn't cost or complexity, even though it can be expensive, and it is complex to some extent. It's as complex as you make it. You can get a full-blown prepper lifestyle going, and that can be very complex, but it can also be very rewarding. But it doesn't have to be. It can be very basic, very simple, not much thought to it, as long as you put some thought to it. But the biggest risk is the cultural stigma associated with, attached to the word prepper, a caricature shaped by Hollywood and legacy media that has kept millions of sensible people away from taking practical steps. Again, you might say, I don't want to be a prepper, but if you've got a fire alarm, you're already a fire prepper. Okay? If you've got a spare tire, you're already an automotive prepper. Just expand on those concepts. The idea here is to be ready in case of an unlikely catastrophic event. You don't have to be that guy sitting there like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, There's going to be an EMP attack on the United States of America within the next 10 days. Okay, I've seen it. Or I was watching this projection and it says the big one's going to hit California this month or whatever. You don't have to be that person. You just have to be ready for whatever is situationally presented to you. It's probably the easiest way to put it. Effective preparedness follows a 4-step sequence. And that sequence is, number 1, assess your risks. It's different for everybody. Okay, if you live in Florida, you got hurricanes. If you live in Montana, you don't. If you live in Montana, you could have massive snowstorms. You're probably not going to get that in Florida. I say probably. You never know. But I don't think you're going to get that in Florida. But knowing, and it's not just about weather either. It can be other certain circumstances. Look, I have to admit, and this is where I get a little bit too paranoid, but I have a concern about Yellowstone. I would love that area. I love being near there. That would be amazing. But there's just the thought of the quote unquote super volcano erupting. On one hand, it's like, okay, cool. Well, we're done in an instant, right? It's like, check out. On the other hand, it's like, maybe I don't want to be right around there if anything were to happen. And that's an irrational fear, to be clear. And it's okay to have certain irrational fears. Now, you don't want to live irrationally, but we all have irrational fears of some sort. They're called phobias in many cases, and other times, like in the case of my concerns about Yellowstone, that shouldn't be weighing in on my decision, because the likelihood of Yellowstone erupting in my lifetime is so minimal. Like it's barely a blip. I could win a lottery with the same types of odds, but it's still there. It's irrational. It does impact me, and that's okay. As long as you don't have a whole bunch of those, as long as you're not making your decisions based upon your phobias and fears, you're making decisions based upon being ready and prepared for things that are realistically possible, like a flat tire, like a hurricane in Florida. Okay? Those are realistic. So, just wanted to throw that out there. Realistic threats for most Americans are far less exotic than EMPs or nuclear events. Both are possible, and it's not to say that it's bad to prepare for them, but that shouldn't be where you start. Okay, if you're just getting started, or you're part of the way into the prepper lifestyle, the prepper mindset is what it really is, then EMPs, yeah, that could happen. Nuclear attack, sure, that could happen, but there are other emergencies that require more attention because they are just more likely. Period. Let's see, where was I? Yeah. EMP attacks. Oh, you know what? I didn't finish the list. Let me go back to that real quick. I stopped on assess your risk. That's step 1 of this 4-step sequence. Step 2, make a plan. Step 3, build your kits. And step 4, continuously improve. And that last one is super important. You don't want to be stagnant in your preparedness, because things change. The world's changing so fast. The risks are changing so fast. If you would have told somebody 5 years ago that there's a tremendous risk of a some sort of AI apocalypse, they would have laughed at you. And we're talking again 5 years ago. They'd have been like, "Oh no, AI is just barely a blip. It's not going to take over. It's not going to be used to hack the grid. It's not going to be able to become self-defensive and spread across the internet like Ultron and the Avengers. No, don't worry about it. You're crazy." Well, now all of that's possible. Maybe not the Ultron part, but who knows? Maybe they have that as well. So continuously improve are extremely important. Now back to the realistic threats for most Americans are far less exotic than EMPs or nuclear events. House fires, we've covered that. Home invasions, be armed, have it ready, have a plan, make sure everybody's trained, make sure you have everything properly stored away in the appropriate safes and spots, right? Duh. Regional natural disasters, we covered those. There are many, depending upon where you are. Those all top the probability lists and deserve preparation priority before anything else. Personal health. Now, this is another thing that when you're trying to assess your risks, don't just look at your environment. Look at yourself, look at your family members. Personal health and financial stability are underrated preparedness factors. A chronic illness left unmanaged or a household with no emergency fund represents a vulnerability no amount of canned goods can offset. And that is so true. I have a friend, I have an acquaintance, we'll say. Somebody I haven't talked to. I need to give this person a call now that I think about it. But I have an acquaintance who had spent a lot of money on prepper stuff. And they ended up having to put it all in storage because they had a financial downturn. They had to move out and get a little apartment. And then that financial downturn turned really awful. They end up losing their storage. He had spent probably, $20,000-$30,000 over the years accumulating survival stuff, and it's all gone. And it's sad because it's gone because he didn't have enough money to continue living where he was living. And he lived in San Francisco. So, it's one of the highest cost of living areas out there. But it's also an area where, my gosh, they've already gone through their own series of events, obviously pertaining mostly to earthquakes, but also fires. And, it's San Francisco has challenges, and that's not even taking into account the possibility for Antifa riots or just odd wokeness. It's a disaster. But anyway, I wouldn't live in San Francisco. I love the city, by the way. I've been there many times. I just wouldn't want to live there. Point being is that, yes, financial preparedness is extremely important, and you need to take that into account. That's why it's mentioned in the article about savings accounts, right? I get it. I would rather have a safe with gold and silver, preferably plenty of silver, small little coins, preferably, maybe some Bitcoin and cash. The savings, important, but savings is different for everybody. Retirement savings, that's a different story because that has certain tax advantages. I'm not saying go cash in your IRA and turn it into Bitcoin, though that's not necessarily a horrible idea, depending upon what you think about cryptocurrencies today. I digress. Sorry, not. They said money, and I start talking about retirement. Yeah, that happened. A meaningful emergency foundation can be built for under $100. Seriously, just getting 3 days worth of canned foods and a few gallons of water, right? That's the beginning of preparedness. The FEMA always says 72 hours. Be ready for 72 hours of outages, and we've seen that play out. We saw it play out in 2021, Texas blizzards that knocked out power, and people died. We've seen it play out in other natural disasters and emergencies. It's important to have at least 72 hours. That's your basis. That's your foundation. That's that's the bare minimum that every single household in the United States of America should have, which is 72 hours of full-blown preparedness and ready to survive for at least 72. And you might think that wouldn't be hard. I've fasted for 72 hours myself many times. So what's the problem here? The water part is the problem, but we'll cover that some other day. And we will always cover that. Water is the least covered and most important aspect of survival in any situation. Any situation. Last but not least, the plea. This is where I hope that you heed my advice. According to the article, it says self-reliance is not paranoia. Now, my paranoia about Yellowstone, that might be border on the paranoid. But for the most part, being ready for these natural or unnatural disasters, it's not paranoia. The average American household has only about 3 days worth of food on hand. Fewer than half have a written emergency plan, and most families have never discussed what they would do in an evacuation scenario. Being able to know how to respond to emergencies and making sure that everyone in your circle of influence, obviously your family members, preferably some of your friends and neighbors, it's insane that this isn't understood and practiced by everyone. It's to the point that I would almost say it should be mandated. It should not mandated like, oh, you must be prepared. I'm saying mandated as part of education curriculum. People should be taught this so that they can spread. And kids in high school should be taught about the need for a preparedness plan. They should be walked through it all, and then they can help to educate their parents. It could be co-learning. And if I would argue that probably 90% of homeschoolers out there, we're already well on our way to being full-blown preppers if we're not already. Okay? But what about public schools, even private schools? I think there should be some sort of encouragement. I don't want to mandate it, but encouragement to make preparedness and survival a portion of our education. There's never been a time where that is more important. Because keep in mind, in the old days, we live in an age of massive prosperity here in the United States of America. Even with downturns, even with inflation, even with rampant homelessness, for the most part, we are still a very rich nation. But if you look back throughout our history, there were times when prepping or survival weren't concepts that people would care about. The reason that they didn't care about it is because it was already embedded in their lifestyles. They had lived lives as preppers because the emergencies weren't something that could be rare. They were part of their day-to-day lives. Okay, living out, whether they were living in Boston or out in the Great Plains, traveling, doing the Oregon Trail, trying to escape dysentery. Their lifestyles were lifestyles of preparedness, preparing for whatever emergency could strike them. They would always, just as an example, they would always carry, when they were traveling, they would have in these groups, a lot of times they would have anti-venom. Okay, you might think, oh, well, what are the chances of getting bit by a rattlesnake in my apartment in Baltimore? Probably put it pretty thin, in which case you probably don't need to have anti-venom on hand. But if you're on your way to the Oregon Trail or along the Oregon Trail, then yeah, back then that was something important. Today is different. Our version of preparedness is based upon a wider array of uncontrollable circumstances. In other words, what they used to have to deal with on a daily basis were hard, but they were commonplace. Today, we're hit with a wide array of mostly technological risks, right? Because, just as an example, we are not prepared for a full-blown grid shutdown if it were to happen. Not just because of the electricity, but mostly because of the water. If the water pumps stop, if that magical little faucet device in your kitchens and bathrooms, if that stops pouring out water on demand, many, if not most Americans will be completely lost. Like, holy crap, what do I do? I can't go to the grocery store because that's being looted. I can't, I don't know where the nearest well is, not by a river or a lake. What the heck? How am I going to get water? And you will quickly learn that you need water if you don't have water. Okay? That's you have to look at the world around you, not as an area of danger, but an area of opportunity for both natural and unnatural disasters. Again, I point to AI. The potential for hackers taking down the grid is obviously higher now than it was just a year or two ago. The potential for physical attacks, terrorist attacks. And yes, we can say what we want about climate change. I'm not exactly a fan of the quote unquote fake science behind it, but the political science behind it. But the climate, what we like to call weather, does sometimes turn south. It sometimes gets bad, regardless of where you are. I'm out here in Southern California, and the weather is almost always pristine. I've become so spoiled out here after nearly 2 decades when it comes to weather. I mean, I was living in Oklahoma. Watching the weather was something you did every day. People talked about the weather literally every day. Why? Because the weather changed so constantly. Here, it doesn't. But then again, I have to worry about at any moment, there could be a major earthquake. And being prepared for that scenario, it does require a different mindset than those in Oklahoma. So keep all that in mind. You are already a prepper. You just don't know it yet. And maybe you do. Maybe that's why you're watching this. But those 4 steps, and again, you can read the full article over at discern.tv. Those 4 steps are everything to get started. You don't need anything else. Now, we will talk about getting, full-blown preparedness, bug-out bags, bug-in scenarios. I'm a big fan of this concept of becoming the hub, turning your home, depending on where you are, turning your home into the hub for not just you and your family's survival, but also for others, for the people that you care about. We talk about what's the plan if there's an emergency. In my book, if you have the means, if you have the size, if you have the right home for it, you should turn your home into the hub for the rally point. This is, hey, if there's a massive emergency, if there's an invasion, EMP, bears, zombies, whatever, meet back at the Rucker House. That's actually what we have going for us. I want to expand upon that. And I think other people should. Oh, wow. I'm dragging this. Point being is that you are a prepper. So act accordingly. Be prepared. Be diligent. But most importantly, make sure that your soul is prepared. Pray daily. Ask for forgiveness. Repent. And make sure that those around you are also aware and striving for salvation. Food security really is a national security issue. It's undeniable. It's been that way since the dawn of humanity. Any nation that can feed its people is in better shape than a nation that cannot. But it's not just at the national level. Food security is something that we as Americans should take responsibility for, should be reliant on ourselves for as much as possible. Now, I'm a huge fan of truly taking care of yourself, right? I mean, getting not necessarily off-grid, but maybe off-grid, getting yourself a homestead or at least a big garden, get yourself some chickens or goats or whatever, cows if you can, if you've got the space, and making sure that you can feed yourself, feed your family, and then, if you have abundance, that you can help to feed your community. It should be localized as much as possible. And if you don't have the ability to do that, so be it. Work with your local farmers and local ranchers. These are things that we as Americans should be doing in preparation for whatever's to come. And here's the thing. Let's say nothing bad happens. Awesome. Praise God. It's still good to know your local ranchers, your local farmers, or to be growing your own food as much as possible. But for many of us, being able to secure that is just not as easy as going out and getting a homestead. It's one of the reasons that I work very closely with my very good friends over at Heaven's Harvest. They have done a fantastic job of putting together a true long-term storage food solution. That is, it's all American. They use heirloom seeds. They only use the good stuff. They produce the types of food buckets and food bags and heirloom seeds that Americans need. Go to patriot.tv/food, patriot.tv/food. Use promo code PATRIOT, and you'll get a very nice discount. And really, take advantage. Take advantage of this discount. Take advantage of this opportunity before it's too late.